Welcome back. Now, President Joe Biden has officially dropped out of the race for president, injecting even more uncertainty into the outlook for markets as we near Election Day in November. And joining me as we discuss this in greater detail is investment strategist at Old Mutual Wealth, Izak Odendaal. Thank you so much for your time, Izak. Now, there's been, I think, for maybe the last few weeks, the narrative of a Trump trade. What exactly has that entailed, and is it in danger right now?
Okay, so what is the Trump trade? Essentially, if you look at Trump's policy platform, it is essentially about, as we know, trade restrictions, tariffs, anti-China, etc. Tax cuts. That was the big achievement of his first term in office, was lowering taxes, and I think he will try and push for lower, especially company taxes, if he wins another term. Deregulation, kind of cutting red tape across the US economy. That should favor US domestic companies, US industrial companies. And then the other thing, of course, is he's historically always favored lower interest rates.
Okay.
Being a property developer. So I think that's kind of part of the Trump trade mix. Is essentially kind of companies with strong US roots, you could say, versus companies that rely very heavily on imports from China, for instance. So that's in a nutshell the Trump trade. I think the question is it in danger now that Joe Biden has dropped out? The reality is it really is too soon to tell. Joe Biden kind of endorsed Kamala Harris to be his successor, but that hasn't been kind of formally certified by the Democratic Party. There might be other challenges. They've got a convention coming up in a few weeks' time, and only then will we know for certain that she is going to take the mantle. And then we'll have to see. I mean, Trump has quite a big lead in the polls at this stage, and also in the election prediction markets. That I think is quite an interesting place to look at these political trends, isn't those prediction markets? But look, the election is still a long time away, and a lot can happen between now and November.
So would you say that markets right now have they actually started to price in a lot of volatility, particularly as we get closer to the 5th of November, or are markets just kind of in a wait and see area at this point?
Yes and no. I think in terms of pricing in, the good news is that markets are kind of chewing on the idea of a Trump presidency. So unlike 2016, when it was a complete surprise, this time around it's not going to be a complete surprise. So in that sense, I think it should be a smoother ride. However, leading up to November, I fully expect uncertainty and volatility to pick up. All of this, of course, happens against the backdrop of a Fed that is probably going to start cutting interest rates soon. And I think that also makes it kind of difficult to disentangle, what is the dog and what's the tail?
Yes.
Because also what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had a big rotation in sectors in the US market away from, tech into small caps, out of growth into value. Is that because of politics, because of Trump and Biden, or is that because the markets are starting to anticipate that the Fed will be rates soon? Because we've had a string of good inflation readings in the US. We also have signs the labor market is sort of cooling around the edges. All that points to the Fed making an interest rate announcement, probably not this month, but then at their next meeting in September.
Well, it's quite interesting because looking at the political landscape, obviously maybe heightened uncertainty, you'd maybe see, people fleeing to safety rather. But do you think that maybe could be limited because of the expectation that the Fed will start cutting rates soon?
I think ultimately the Fed is the more important player here.
Okay, yeah.
But obviously politics can be noisy and politics can overshadow, kind of bigger trends in the short term. So yes, I expect markets can be quite choppy and quite volatile as we get closer to November. But it also depends, because if Trump maintains his lead throughout, then probably not. But if Harris does win the nomination and she is certified as the candidate, and who knows, we'll have to wait and see how she actually performs in the next couple of months. But I think ultimately,
Yeah.
it is the Fed that matters more, because I think one of the interesting things is that there isn't. I mean, there are big differences between the Republican and the Democratic platforms.
Yes.
But the one area where there isn't much of a difference is in terms of their approach towards China, and both parties are now very much in the China hawkish camp, and therefore both parties are kind of turning their backs to a greater or lesser extent on international free trade.
It's quite interesting also that you bring up the point that, the differences between the different platforms, Republican versus Democrats, but also really the one thing that they agree on is their stance on China. Are there any worries at all in terms of if we do get Democratic leadership under Kamala Harris, that maybe there could be a difference in the kind of policies that she champions, or would we expect a continuation of what was started by Biden?
I would expect that her policies would be more or less a continuation of Biden's, and that should be good for infrastructure investment. It should be good for green energy. It is probably not going to be that good for broad company profits to the extent that they want to raise taxes. But I think in all of this, the other area of uncertainty is we will focus on the White House and who wins the presidency. But obviously, winning Congress also matters a lot. And I think the other big question then is, what is the combination of presidency, House of Representatives, and the Senate? Those three things together kind of run the country. We're not just focusing on who wins the White House, but who wins the other important areas of government. Because if it's a divided government, let's say one party wins the White House, other party wins Congress, then nothing much is going to happen. If it's a clean sweep, as we saw in 2016, then the country, then whichever party is in control will have all the levers of power available to it, and then you can start seeing things like big tax cuts or big changes in industrial policy or infrastructure, etc.
All right. Well, Izak, is going to be a very interesting few months as we head to that 5th of November election. Of course, we'll be looking out for how markets digest all the developments in the political landscape there. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. That was Izak Odendaal from Old Mutual Wealth.